Hello and welcome to our study on the book of Esther. We're on lesson 8, and we're going to cover in this study chapter 6 and chapter 7. And we're going to jump right into chapter 6 here in just a moment, and then we will flow right into chapter 7 if you have your Bible or you're following along on verses that we're sharing with you. So here's what's happened. Esther went before the king and requested a banquet for him, the king, to be present, and then for Haman, his number one advisor, to be present, just the three of them. But we know that God was the fourth person at this banquet. So here they go. They have the banquet, and the king says to Esther, Esther, what is it that you're requesting of me? She is the one who created the banquet. She is the one who wanted to ask him something. And so here's the banquet. The king has had his wine, his food, and he's enjoying himself. And he says, Esther, I'll give you up to half of the kingdom. What is it that you wish? So Esther wanted to buy a little bit more time. And so she said, my wish is that you will attend another banquet with me tomorrow, both you and Haman, and just me. Will you do that? Well, the king was pleased to do that. They had plenty of great food. They had plenty of the king's great wine. And so they leave. They make their ways to their normal locations, the king to his house, Esther to where she lived, Haman to his house, ready for the big banquet tomorrow, the second banquet. Esther perhaps was trying to gather a little bit more courage, and she felt like she needed a little bit more time to kind of butter up the king before she asked him the main reason of why she wanted him at the banquet. And so we're going to read. The king definitely had a sleepless night. For we go here to chapter 6, verse 1. That night the king could not sleep. So he ordered the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought in and read to him. It was found recorded that Mordecai had exposed Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, who had conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. We read in verse 3, what honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this? The king asked. Nothing has been done for him, his attendants answered. Now, according to what I've read, this was very unusual for this king. He was very quick to reward people who protected him, very quick to reward people who brought honor to him and to the Persian kingdom. And yet somehow he forgot to reward Mordecai sometime back for actually saving his life. Did he forget accidentally, or was this God-driven so that God was ready to do something special with Mordecai and with the king, and the special privilege and the special thing the king was going to do for Mordecai? Well, I think it's that. So let's read. We'll go ahead and read in verse 4. The king said, who's in the court? Now, Haman had just entered the outer court of the palace to speak to the king about impaling Mordecai on the pole he had set up for him. His attendants answered, Haman is sitting in the court. Bring him in, the king ordered. When Haman entered, the king asked him, what should be done for the man the king delights to honor? Now Haman thought to himself, who is there that the king would rather honor than me? Every time I read this, I want to laugh because he's so conceited and so self-centered. He's thinking it's for him. Well, if the king wants to honor me, I've got to think of something really, really good right here. So we'll read verse 7. So he answered the king, for the man the king delights to honor, have them bring a royal robe the king has worn, and a horse the king has ridden, one with a royal crest placed on its head. Then let the robe and the horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor, and lead him on the horse through the city streets, proclaiming before him, This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. Haman is bubbling over with arrogance as he thinks that he's creating his own celebration parade. I want you to imagine with me the facial expression and how it could have changed on Haman when the king replied. Verse 10. Go at once. The king commanded Haman, get the robe and the horse and do just as you've suggested for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything you have recommended. So Haman got the robe and the horse. He robed Mordecai, led him on the horseback through the city streets, proclaiming before him, this is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. Afterward, Mordecai returned to the king's gate. But Haman rushed home with his head covered in grief and told Zeresh, his wife, and all of his friends everything that happened to him. Don't you want to chuckle? I mean, it's funny. His advisors and his wife, Zeresh, said to him, since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him. You will surely come to ruin. While they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried Haman away to the banquet Esther prepared. I'm sorry, but that's just too funny. Haman's advisors and his wife basically said, you're doomed, sucker. You're doomed. He's a Jew. You're not going to have this thing work out that's going to be in your favor. You have problems. This is one of the saddest yet humorous things personally I've ever read in the Bible. So now his royal escort has arrived, leading Haman to the banquet that he should be so excited about attending with Esther and King Xerxes. I presume that his stomach was in knots as we begin verse 1 of chapter 7. So the king and Haman went to Queen Esther's banquet. And as they were drinking wine on the second day, the king again asked, Queen Esther, what is your petition? It will be given you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted. So I like this. The king is acknowledging Esther's prominence because he addresses her. Queen Esther, what is your petition? Queen Esther, I think that's cool. Now notice here that Esther, she doesn't delay her question, but she's very abrupt. We go directly into verse 3. Then Queen Esther answered, if I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition. And spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress would justify disturbing the king. King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, who is he? Where is he? The man who has dared to do such a thing. Now, think about this. The king is not getting it. He's not adding 2 + 2 = 4. He doesn't really get it at all right here. He's in shock. I mean, I think the king would have been less surprised if Esther would have asked permission to go on an elephant ride from where they were all the way to Beirut, Lebanon, and back. I don't think he'd have been more surprised. Who is he? Where is he? The man who's dared to do such a thing. Verse 6. Are you ready? Esther said, an adversary and an enemy, the vile Haman. Adversary and enemy? I mean, that describes the work of the devil to those who know Jesus and those who are the children of God. All the pain, all the murder, all the deception, all the havoc in this world is rooted in the evil one, Satan, the devil. Then Haman was terrified before the king and queen. If Haman wasn't wearing depends, I mean, I don't know. You know what? He was terribly embarrassed. He was terribly frightened, terribly afraid. He knew he was doomed now. Verse 7, the king got up in a rage. He left his wine and went out into the palace garden. I think he got up. He was in such anger. In such shock. He didn't know what to think, know what to do at first. And he had to get up and cool down a little bit to make a wise decision. And so while this is happening and the king's cooling his temper, it says, but Haman, realizing that the king had already decided his fate, stayed behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. You know, when you look at all this, the unseen hand of God is there directing everything for himself and for his people. We read in verse 8. Just as the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was reclining. You can imagine that sight, right? Haman knows he's doomed. He's falling almost on top of Esther. He's on her couch where she's lying, and he's begging her for his life. You can visualize that. The king walks in, and the king sees Haman laying there next to the queen, and so the king defends her honor. The king exclaimed, will he even molest the queen while she's with me in the house? As soon as the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Haman would never see the light of day again. He'd never see the king again. He'd never see his family again. Verse 9. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs attending the king, said, now I want you to notice, he set this thing up. I think he apparently didn't really like Haman either, and he saw this opportunity. Here's what he said. Verse 9. A pole reaching to a height of 50 cubits stands by Haman's house. He had it set up for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king. The king said, impale him on it. So they impaled Haman on the pole he had set up for Mordecai. Then the king's fury was subsided. You know, when I read that, I think back all the way to the second chapter of the book of Esther. In the first verse, it says that the king's anger was subsided. And it was subsided after he had made his declaration against Vashti, the queen, which, moving her out of her position, was leading the way for Esther to be found and Esther to be chosen by the king to be his queen. This is God's doing. This is God's leading. The king's wrath was subsided and led him to look for the new queen. Now, right here, his wrath is subsided, which is leading him to look for the next person to take the position of the second person in command of the kingdom of Persia, the advisor to the king in place of Haman. Who is it that he would choose? Who is it that he would give this new position to? Who will it be? You get 3 guesses, and the first 2 guesses don't count. We'll look at this and find out the answer next time when we study Esther chapter 8.